The mahogany-paneled boardroom gleamed with wealth and confidence. Sunlight poured through tall windows glinting off the polished table where a dozen executives in sharp suits sat waiting. Their laughter was nervous, the kind that always followed whenever Logan Griffin entered a room like a storm. Logan, tall, broad-shouldered, the image of power strode inside with a crumpled envelope in his hand. His presence sucked the air out of the room. He threw the papers onto the table. "Does anyone here understand this?" he barked. The documents scattered like leaves across the gleaming wood. Mariana, his personal assistant, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, it's written in Basque. I already called 4 agencies. No one is available today, not even online." "Useless," Logan muttered. "A company of our size, and no one, absolutely no one, can translate a single piece of paper." He picked up one of the sheets, holding it as if it were a dead bird, and smirked. "All right, let's make this interesting," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'll give my entire monthly salary, $150,000, to whoever can translate this right now." The room erupted in uneasy chuckles. No one took him seriously. They didn't have to. The bet was safe. None of them even knew what Basque sounded like. Then, from the far corner of the room, a voice cut through the laughter. Steady, unshaken, "I can translate it." Every head turned toward the sound. By the water cooler stood a black woman in a pale blue cleaning uniform. Her mop bucket glistened under the fluorescent lights. Her name tag read, Rosie Johnson. For a moment, silence stretched thin across the table. Then came the whispers sharp as blades. Did she just say, "The cleaning lady"? "Oh, come on. She's lost her mind." Logan's eyebrow arched. He let out a mocking laugh. "You expect me to believe that you, a cleaning lady, can translate—" Basque Rosie didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her posture calm, her dark eyes fixed firmly on his. "I don't expect you to believe anything, Mr. Griffin. I expect you to hand me the papers." The room buzzed with murmurs. A few executives exchanged smirks, the kind that always carried the unspoken message, "A black woman with a mop doesn't belong at this table." But Logan, curious despite himself, thrust the pages into her hands with a flourish. "Be my guest." Rosie scanned the lines. Her fingers were steady, her gaze confident. After only a few seconds, she looked up. "This is a notice of inheritance," she said evenly. "It states that a woman named Lourdes Garmendia passed away a month ago. She was your great-aunt on your mother's side. She left you property and a considerable sum in Bilbao. You're listed as the only living heir. But," she tapped the paper gently, "the deadline to accept the inheritance is today at 5 p.m. The room froze. Logan blinked. That's impossible. You're making it up." "I'm not." Rosie's voice carried the calm weight of truth. "Check with the Spanish consulate, but if you want to keep that inheritance, you have less than 2 hours to act." Mariana glanced at her watch, 3:03 p.m. Executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Their nervous laughter had died into silence. The only sound was the drip of water from Rosie's mop bucket. For the first time, Logan's mask of arrogance cracked. His jaw tightened as he reached for his phone, already dialing. The Spanish consulate confirmed every word. When he hung up, his face was pale. He turned back to Rosie, not with mockery now, but with something else. Suspicion, respect, confusion. Rosie handed back the papers, her voice steady. "I believe you owe me your salary, Mr. Griffin." A few executives gasped. Others smirked, waiting for the explosion. Logan stared at her, his pride bleeding in silence. "You really remember that?" he asked. "I remember everything people say," Rosie replied, her tone sharp as glass, "especially when they assume the black woman mopping the floor isn't listening." The words hung heavy in the room. No one laughed this time. The next morning, the story had already spread across Griffin Imports like wildfire. A cleaning lady, a black cleaning lady, had saved the CEO's inheritance with nothing more than her mind. Some laughed it off as an odd anecdote. Others whispered darker things. She must have faked it. Maybe she got lucky. Or maybe Griffin just wanted to make a show of diversity. Rosie Johnson walked the halls with her mop and bucket, the same uniform pressed neat and clean. To most, she was still invisible, just part of the background. But now eyes lingered longer than usual, eyes filled with suspicion, disbelief, or quiet resentment. In the 10th floor conference room, Logan Griffin sat at the head of the table, flanked by his two official translators. The clients of French import company discussed complex contracts filled with legal nuances. James, the senior translator, leaned forward. "He's asking about ISO certifications," James said confidently. Rosie, who had been brought in at Logan's insistence, cleared her throat softly. "Actually," she said, her voice calm but precise, "he asked about origin traceability and environmental compliance. Not ISO." The French client nodded, relieved. "Exactement." "Merci, madame." James stiffened. "I've spoken French for 15 years. Rosie's gaze was steady. "So have I." "And I know what he said." The tension was sharp enough to cut glass. A murmur rippled through the room. Some executives shifted uncomfortably, embarrassed not by the mistake, but by who had corrected it. When the meeting ended, James stormed out, his pride wounded. The junior translator muttered under his breath as he passed Rosie. "Show off. Typical." Rosie pretended not to hear, but the sting was there. She knew the subtext: a black woman doesn't belong correcting a white man in front of clients. Logan, however, lingered at the table. For the first time in years, he had seen someone dismantle arrogance with nothing but quiet competence. He didn't smile. Pride would never allow it, but his eyes followed Rosie as she packed her notes. Later that afternoon, Logan cornered her near the supply room. The smell of bleach and floor wax hung in the air. "You were extraordinary today," he admitted. Rosie kept her back straight. "I did my job. You did more than that. You saved the deal." Her hands tightened on the mop handle. "Mr. Griffin, let me be clear. If you want me to translate, pay me as a professional. But don't pat me on the back like I'm some novelty. I won't be your company mascot." The words landed heavy. For once, Logan had no retort. He only nodded, watching her walk away, her shoulders squared against the world. By Friday, the whispers had grown. In the cafeteria, executives sipped lattes and shook their heads. She probably got her degree from some quota program. Affirmative action at its finest. Next thing you know, she'll be sitting in the boardroom. Rosie heard every word. She always did, but she never flinched. She had spent a lifetime learning how to stand tall while others tried to make her small. And as Logan watched from the far end of the hall, he realized something that unsettled him more than the inheritance or the consulate or even his own pride. Rosie Johnson was not just competent, she was brilliant, and the only reason no one had seen it sooner was because the world had already decided what a black woman with a mop was allowed to be. Logan couldn't shake her from his thoughts. The boardroom, the translation, the way her words cut through arrogance with quiet precision, it all gnawed at him. So he did what men of power often do. He ordered Mariana, his assistant, to pull a file. By Tuesday morning, a thick folder lay on his desk. Logan opened it, expecting to find nothing more than a few scraps of janitorial work history. Instead, he froze. Northwestern University. Magna cum laude. Masters in Translation and Interpretation. 3 years at the U.S. Consulate in Barcelona. Category A Diplomatic Interpreter. Logan leaned back in his leather chair, the city skyline reflected in the glass wall behind him. A cleaning lady with credentials better than half the executives on his payroll. But then 2 years missing, no records, no work. And 5 years ago, suddenly appearing at Griffin Imports, with a mop. Logan closed the file slowly as though afraid it might bite him. Something was wrong, something more than just bad luck. That afternoon, he found Rosie organizing cleaning supplies in the basement. The dim fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Rows of bleach bottles and disinfectants stood neatly on the shelves, everything in perfect order. "Rosie," he said, leaning in the doorway. She glanced over her shoulder, her face unreadable. "Mr. Griffin, I know you're overqualified for this job." Her body stilled. The mop in her hand pressed against the floor like a soldier at attention. "Overqualified," she repeated, her tone sharp. "Or out of place. I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said. People like you always do." She turned fully now, her dark eyes unflinching. "You want to know why I clean floors instead of sitting in some glass office? Because every time I applied for jobs I was qualified for, I heard the same excuses. Not a cultural fit, not the right image. Maybe next time." Her voice didn't rise, but the sting was in every word. "Do you know what those words mean, Mr. Griffin? They mean too black for the front desk, too black for the client meetings, too black to represent us." Logan had no answer. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Rosie went on, her tone calmer now, but heavier. "When my son was diagnosed, I needed steady money. Cleaning jobs pay on time. No interviews where they look at my skin before they look at my resume. No polite smiles hiding the same old prejudice. Just work. Honest hard work." She placed the mop back into its bucket, her hands steady, her voice softer now. "I'm not here for charity, Mr. Griffin. I'm here for survival." For the first time, Logan saw more than a mystery. He saw the weight of a lifetime carried in her shoulders, the quiet scars left by doors that had slammed shut again and again, not because she lacked ability, but because of the color of her skin. And in that dim basement, Logan Griffin realized something that shook him more than the inheritance or the board's whispers. Rosie Johnson was not in the shadows because she belonged there. She was in the shadows because the world had never allowed her to stand in the light. Logan caught her in the hallway 2 days later, just as she was pushing a cart stacked with cleaning supplies. The executives in polished shoes walked past without so much as a glance, as if she were part of the wallpaper. But Logan stepped directly into her path. "Rosie," he began, lowering his voice, "I want to make you an offer." She stopped, folding her arms across her chest. "If this is about another translation gig, I'll consider it. But if it's something else, it's not just that." He hesitated. For once, the sharp-witted CEO looked uncertain. "You deserve more than a mop and a bucket. Come work for me officially, as a translator, a real position, full salary." Rosie stared at him for a long beat. Then slowly she shook her head. "No," Logan blinked. "No, why not?" "Because you don't get it," she said firmly. "Every time someone like you makes an offer, it comes with strings. You want to feel like a savior. I want to keep my dignity." His jaw tightened. "This isn't charity, it's recognition." "Recognition!" She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Tell me, Mr. Griffin, would you be offering this if I were a white man in a suit instead of a black woman with a mop? Or would you just call it what it is? A job well done." Her words hit him like a slap. Around them, employees passing in the hallway slowed, pretending not to listen, but clearly catching every word. Rosie's voice carried not loud, but clear enough. "You think I haven't heard it before?" She continued, her eyes flashing. "When I was younger, I interned at a major firm downtown. I translated flawlessly in 4 languages during meetings. Do you know what one partner said as he left the room?" Logan stayed silent. He said, "She's sharp, but let's be real. Clients don't want a blackface fronting negotiations." The memory tightened her throat, but she pressed on. "That's when I learned the truth. No matter how good I was, no matter how many degrees or how many languages, I'd always be the token, the charity case, the diversity hire, and I won't live like that again." The hallway was so quiet now that even the hum of the lights seemed loud. Logan felt the weight of every gaze on him, waiting for his reply. For once, he had none. Rosie gripped the handle of her cart. "You want my help, you pay me for my work. But don't dress it up like you're doing me a favor. Because I don't need favors. I need respect." She pushed the cart forward, the wheels squeaking against the floor, and left him standing in the hallway like a man stripped of his armor. For the rest of the day, Logan replayed her words over and over. Not charity, respect. It was such a simple demand. Yet in the gleaming towers of his empire, it was the one thing no one had ever given her. And for the first time in his career, Logan Griffin wondered whether the real poverty in his company wasn't financial at all, but moral. Logan chose the restaurant carefully, Le Bernardin, one of Chicago's most exclusive. White tablecloths hushed, lighting the kind of place where business titans signed contracts worth millions. He told himself it was a professional dinner, nothing more. But when he saw Rosie step inside, the weight of that lie hit him. She wore a simple black blouse and dark jeans, nothing extravagant. No makeup except for a touch of gloss. Yet the way she carried herself, head high, eyes steady, made her more striking than anyone else in the room. Logan rose. "Thank you for coming." Let's be clear, Rosie said as she slid into the chair across from him. This is business. Translation services rendered, payment received. That's all. Of course, he said, though the words felt thin. The waiter appeared, menus in hand. He greeted Logan with a polished smile, then turned to Rosie and froze for the briefest second. His smile faltered, then returned, but shallower, less genuine. And for the lady, he asked Logan, not Rosie. Rosie's lips pressed into a thin line. Water, she said evenly. The waiter jotted it down without meeting her eyes. The meal began quietly. They spoke about contracts, clients' languages. Rosie's insights were sharp, her knowledge wide. Logan found himself captivated, not just by what she said, but by how effortlessly she moved through ideas, weaving connections most executives would miss. For a moment, he almost forgot where they were, until it happened. A woman at the next table, draped in pearls, brushed past Rosie's chair on her way to the restroom. She paused, flashing a smile that carried more venom than charm. "What a lovely blouse," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "So simple. You're not an actress, are you?" Or her eyes flicked toward Logan, and the implication dripped into the space between them. Something else. Rosie held her composure. "No, I'm a translator." The woman's smile tightened. "Oh, of course." She glided away, but her companion leaned in and whispered loudly enough for Logan to hear, an escort. Obvious. Logan's chair scraped the floor as he stood. He crossed to their table, his voice low but edged with fire. "Excuse me, do you have something to say about my guest?" The pearl-draped woman blinked, startled. I don't know what you mean. You suggested she was here as an escort." "I never said—" "You didn't have to." Logan's glare silenced her. "That woman over there speaks 6 languages. She has 2 degrees. She saved my company more money in a month than most of you make in a year. She's a professional, and she deserves more respect than you'll ever muster." The woman flushed crimson. Her companion looked away. Logan returned to his table, pulse still pounding. Rosie studied him carefully. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. She tilted her head. "I'm used to it." "Well, I'm not." He shot back, "and I won't let it slide." Her eyes softened just slightly, though her tone remained firm. "Why not?" Logan hesitated. He had no polished answer this time, just the truth pushing at the back of his throat. "Because it's wrong. Because you don't deserve it. Because—" His voice faltered. "Because you matter." Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Rosie looked away first, her expression unreadable. "I think we should go," she said quietly. They left the restaurant together, stepping into the night air. The city lights glowed against the dark sky. Rosie pulled her blouse tighter around her shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured, "for standing up for me. It's been a long time since anyone has." Logan wanted to say something more, something about how much she deserved, how wrong the world was. Instead, he just nodded. They stood beneath the street lamp, the city humming around them. For a fleeting second, Logan felt the world narrow to just the two of them, her calm strength, his restless curiosity, and the invisible line neither dared cross. On the 35th floor, behind a heavy oak door, 3 of Griffin Imports' top executives sat in secret. James Morrison, CFO, Richard Hayes, COO, and Sandra Walsh, head of HR. The blinds were drawn, the city skyline hidden. Their voices were low-clipped, urgent. "This situation has gotten out of hand," James muttered, pushing his glasses higher on his nose. "She's in meetings she doesn't belong in. She's translating contracts worth millions. And Logan? He's clearly invested in her." Richard's lips curled. "A cleaning lady, no, a black cleaning lady, being paid almost as much as our certified translators. What kind of message does that send to our clients, to our staff?" Sandra exhaled, tapping a manicured finger on the table. "It's not sustainable. Every time she walks into a room, she disrupts the hierarchy. People notice, people talk, and frankly, some clients are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" James asked. "The unspoken ones," Sandra said flatly. "Why is a woman like that fronting negotiations?" They all knew what she meant. That wasn't about her resume. It wasn't about her skills. It was about her skin. Richard leaned back, steepling his fingers. We need to protect the company. Quietly. No fuss. We terminate her contract. Call it restructuring, outsourcing, anything. Logan doesn't have to know it came from us." James nodded slowly. "Friday afternoon. End of the week. She'll have the weekend to process it, and Griffin will cool down by Monday." Sandra hesitated. "You know this isn't about efficiency. It's prejudice. Plain and simple." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Call it whatever you like, but we cannot have a black cleaning woman outshining our white professionals. It undermines everything." Sandra said nothing more. The silence in the room was answer enough. Down in the basement, Rosie scrubbed the same conference room floor she had once saved with her translations. Her movements were steady, methodical, but inside she felt the shift. The stares had grown sharper, the whispers louder. She had heard one earlier that day in the elevator. "She's making waves. People like her don't last long here." Rosie knew what that meant. She had heard it all her life. She didn't need a termination letter to see it coming. That Friday, Sandra appeared in the basement, folder in hand. "Rosie," she began carefully, "we need to talk." Rosie straightened rag still in her hand. "Is there a problem with my work?" "No. Your work is excellent. This is about restructuring. The company has decided to outsource cleaning services. Today will be your last day." Rosie's lips pressed into a thin smile. "And the translation contracts?" "They're under review," Sandra admitted softly. Rosie nodded once. She wasn't naive. "I see." Sandra shifted uncomfortably. "This has nothing to do with performance. You're an excellent employee." "Of course it doesn't," Rosie said, her voice quiet but edged with steel. She packed her things into a cardboard box, just a few belongings, a framed photo of her son, a worn notebook, a set of dictionaries she had kept hidden in the supply closet. By the time Logan discovered the paperwork in Mariana's office, it was too late. Rosie was already walking across the parking lot, box in her arms. The autumn wind tugged at her blouse, but her back was straight, her steps steady. "Rosie, wait!" Logan called, breathless, as he caught up to her. "I didn't authorize this. I'll reverse it." She turned, meeting his eyes with quiet dignity. "There's no need." "What do you mean, no need? This is wrong. You saved this company more than once. You deserve respect." Rosie cut in, her voice steady. "Not pity, not charity, respect. And clearly this place will never give it to me." Logan's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to beg, to promise, but the look in her eyes told him it was useless. Rosie set the box gently into the trunk of her old Honda Civic, closed it with a soft thud, and turned back one last time. "I don't need saving, Mr. Griffin. I need dignity. Remember that." And then she drove away, leaving Logan standing in the cold parking lot, his reflection caught in the fading glow of her taillights. Logan found her 3 nights later in a modest cafe on the south side of Chicago, the kind of place where the walls smelled faintly of coffee and fried food, where neon lights flickered in the window. Rosie sat alone in a corner booth, her son's photo tucked inside the notebook she was scribbling in. She didn't look surprised when he slid into the opposite seat. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "Then why didn't you walk out when you saw me?" Logan asked. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because part of me knew you wouldn't stop until you had answers." He leaned forward. "You're right. I need to understand. You're not just a cleaning lady who happens to speak 6 languages. Who are you, Rosie?" For a long moment she was silent. Then she closed her notebook and folded her hands. "Do you know Meridian Global?" Logan blinked. "Of course. One of the biggest consulting firms in the country. They handle billion-dollar negotiations. I used to work there," Rosie said. Her voice was even, but her eyes carried the weight of years. "I was a senior translator, Category A interpreter. I traveled the world, sat in rooms where men in suits decided the fate of nations. And I thought I'd made it." Logan studied her carefully. "What happened?" She drew in a slow breath. "I discovered contracts that didn't add up, shell companies, offshore accounts. They were laundering money, dirty money from cartels, oligarchs, politicians. And I did what I thought was right. I reported it." The air in the cafe felt heavier now. Logan didn't speak. At first they ignored me. Then they called me incompetent. After that, they made sure I would never work in the field again. Rumors spread that I was unstable, bitter, a liar. My references vanished. My applications went unanswered. I was blacklisted. Her voice dropped lower. And the worst part, I wasn't just up against corruption. I was up against racism. You know how fast a company can bury a black woman's career? Faster than you can sign a check. They told me, "No one will believe you. You're just a translator. You're just a woman. You're just black." Logan clenched his fists under the table. "That's criminal." "It's reality," Rosie replied. And then came the threats. Anonymous calls, cars idling outside my apartment, emails telling me to shut up. I was pregnant by then, and the father, well, he didn't want the burden. He left before Noah was born. Her voice softened when she said her son's name. For a moment, the hardness in her eyes gave way to something gentler, fragile. After that, all I needed was stability. Steady money. Something no one could take away from me. So I picked up a mop. Because mopping floors doesn't come with NDAs or death threats. Logan sat back shaken. He had built his empire believing merit always won, that competence rose to the top. But here was Rosie, brilliant, qualified, destroyed not by failure, but by a system designed to silence her. She sipped her coffee, eyes fixed on him. "Now you know. That's the story behind your cleaning lady." Logan swallowed hard. "You were punished for telling the truth." "I was punished," Rosie said quietly, "for daring to be a black woman who told the truth." The words cut through him like steel. And in that dim cafe, Logan realized the greatest injustice wasn't just that Rosie had lost her career. It was that the world had decided her voice, her very existence, was inconvenient. Monday morning broke with a storm that had nothing to do with the weather. The headlines hit first: bold, merciless, impossible to ignore. Black whistleblower once fired for misconduct, now working inside Griffin Imports. Rosie's name was everywhere. Her photo, snapped without permission in the company's parking lot, was plastered across news sites. The old Meridian Global smear campaign had been resurrected, polished, and fed to the public as if it were new. By 9 a.m., the lobby of Griffin Imports was swarming with reporters. Cameras flashed as employees hurried through the revolving doors. A few ducked their heads in embarrassment. Others whispered as Rosie stepped off the elevator, shoulders squared her cleaning cart, rattling softly against the marble floor. The questions rang out like bullets. "Miss Johnson, did you really falsify documents at Meridian? Were you fired for incompetence or fraud? Are you using Mr. Griffin's influence to cover up your past?" Rosie said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was the only shield the world allowed a black woman to carry. But inside, her chest burned. On the 35th floor, Logan slammed his phone onto the table. "This is garbage," he snapped at the board members gathered around him. "Rosie Johnson is not guilty of anything. She was the victim." James Morrison, CFO, adjusted his glasses with calculated calm. "Victim or not, the optics are disastrous. Clients are calling. Contracts are being suspended. Because they're swallowing a racist narrative," Logan shot back. "Because they'd rather believe a lie than accept that a black woman exposed their corruption." Richard Hayes leaned forward, his tone ice cold. "Perception matters more than truth in this business. And the perception is that Griffin Imports is harboring a liability." Sandra Walsh, HR director, avoided Logan's gaze. "The company's reputation is at stake. We need a solution." Logan's voice rose. "The solution is to stand by her." James's eyes narrowed. "Or the solution is to cut her loose. Quietly. Publicly. Fire her, issue a statement, and move on." The room fell silent, the weight of his words heavy in the air. Logan's jaw clenched. "No. I won't destroy an innocent woman's life to protect your egos." Richard's voice dropped sharp as a blade. "Then perhaps you're no longer fit to lead this company." Logan stared at them, fury boiling under his skin. "You'd fire me before you admit your prejudice." But deep down he knew the truth they would. Meanwhile, Rosie retreated to the restroom on the 12th floor, locking the door behind her. She leaned against the sink, staring at her reflection under the harsh fluorescent light. The woman in the mirror looked tired, battle-worn, but unbroken. She had been here before, dragged through the mud, stripped of her credibility, her race weaponized against her. She knew the script too well. From outside, she heard the muffled voices of 2 employees gossiping near the door. Of course she's trouble. Look at her. Doesn't matter how many languages she speaks, she'll always be the maid who got lucky. Yeah, and Griffin defending her must be personal. You know how these men are with women like her. Rosie closed her eyes, breathing slowly. She wanted to scream, to fight, to demand respect. But she couldn't. Not here. Not yet. She straightened, smoothing her blouse, and unlocked the door. As she stepped past the 2 women, she held her head high. She would not let them see her break. Still, the words clung to her like ash. And as she walked back into the fluorescent-lit corridors of Griffin Imports, Rosie Johnson knew the truth she had always feared. No matter how hard she fought, no matter how brilliant her mind, the world would always try to drag her back to where it thought she belonged. But this time, she would not go quietly. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago loomed like a fortress of stone and glass. Its steps were flooded with cameras, microphones, and reporters jostling for a closer view. By the time Rosie Johnson arrived, escorted by 2 federal agents, the crowd had already swelled into a frenzy. Flashbulbs exploded. Questions were shouted from every angle. "Miss Johnson, are you prepared to testify? Is it true you fabricated documents at Meridian Global? Are you hiding behind Mr. Griffin's influence?" Rosie kept her gaze forward, jaw set, her son's photo tucked into her jacket pocket like a shield. For every step she took, she felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her, centuries of voices telling Black women they didn't belong in halls of power. Inside the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Lawyers rustled papers, journalists whispered, and the judge's gavel finally brought order. "Call your witness," the prosecutor said. "Rosie Johnson." She rose, walked to the stand, and swore the oath. The lights were harsh, the cameras sharper. She knew millions were watching. "Miss Johnson," the prosecutor began, "you worked at Meridian Global between 2015 and 2018. What was your role?" "I was a senior translator and interpreter." Rosie answered steadily. "Category A. I facilitated international negotiations and had access to confidential documents." "And what did you discover during that time?" Rosie inhaled slowly. "I discovered that Meridian Global was laundering money through fraudulent contracts, shell companies in tax havens, billions disguised as legitimate trade. I reported it internally, first to my supervisor, then to directors, then to the vice president. They told me to stop asking questions. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. And when you persisted, the prosecutor pressed. I was fired. My reputation was destroyed. They spread rumors that I was incompetent, unstable, untrustworthy. They blacklisted me from every firm I applied to." The prosecutor nodded. "Do you have evidence?" Rosie reached for the box the agents had recovered from her old apartment. She held up flash drives, documents, recordings. "I kept everything, because I knew one day the truth would matter." The judge examined the files. The courtroom screens lit up with emails, cold words in black and white. Executives at Meridian plotting how to bury her, discussing payments from cartels, even mocking her race. One line appeared in bold on the screen. "Who's going to believe a Black translator over us?" Gasps filled the room. Rosie's throat tightened, but her voice never wavered. "That's what they wrote. That's how they saw me, not as a professional, not as a human being, but as disposable, invisible, unworthy of being believed." The prosecutor leaned closer. "Miss Johnson, why come forward now after all these years?" Rosie's eyes swept the courtroom. "Because silence protects the powerful, and I won't be silent anymore. Not for myself, not for my son, and not for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong because of the color of their skin." For a moment, the room was completely still. Even the judge seemed frozen by the clarity of her words. Then the defense attorney rose. His tone was sharp, polished, laced with disdain. "Miss Johnson, isn't it true you were dismissed for incompetence, that your so-called evidence is circumstantial at best, that you are in fact trying to rewrite your own failures as heroism?" Rosie met his gaze, calm, steady. If exposing corruption is failure, then I accept it. But the real failure is a system that protects criminals while punishing the truth-tellers. The defense attorney smirked. Or perhaps the real issue is that you wanted to rise above your station. A janitor dreaming of being a whistleblower, a cleaning woman playing hero. Isn't that the story you've been selling? Rosie's jaw tightened, but her voice rang out clear. No. The story is that a black woman refused to be silenced, and you can twist it however you like, but the evidence speaks louder than your prejudice. The judge rapped the gavel. Order. The tension hung in the air like smoke. When Rosie finally stepped down from the stand, the courtroom erupted not in jeers, but in a stunned silence that spoke louder than applause. She had not only defended herself, she had turned her testimony into something larger, a reckoning. And as she walked back past the rows of spectators, Logan Griffin, sitting quietly at the back, rose to his feet. For the first time in his life, the powerful CEO found himself humbled not by wealth or authority, but by the unshakable courage of a woman the world had tried to erase. The morning after Rosie's testimony, Chicago awoke to headlines that rippled across the nation. Whistleblower exposes Meridian global corruption. Black translator's evidence shakes billion-dollar empire. Rosie Johnson, hero or opportunist. News anchors dissected every word she had spoken, replaying the footage of her on the stand. Some called her courageous. Others accused her of seeking attention. The internet was even harsher. On social media, hashtags trended in opposite directions. Hashtag justice for Rosie and fraudulent maid. Under every article, the comments split like a fault line. Finally, someone brave enough to stand against corruption. She's nothing but a janitor who got lucky. If she were white, people would call her a hero. She's playing the race card for sympathy. Rosie read none of it directly, but the words still reached her through whispers, through the looks strangers gave her on the train, through the silence that followed her in grocery aisles. Vindication had come, but so had the backlash. At Griffin Imports, the tension was palpable. Some employees approached her quietly with nods of respect. Others turned their backs as she passed. The whispers returned sharper than ever. She embarrassed the company. Logan's only protecting her because he's involved with her. Can you imagine a black woman making all of us look incompetent? Logan stormed into the boardroom that afternoon, fury simmering beneath his controlled exterior. The executive sat stiff, avoiding his gaze. She was right, he said, voice echoing off the glass walls. Meridian was laundering money. She had the evidence. And you people wanted me to fire her to protect our image. James Morrison cleared his throat. Logan, the problem isn't whether she was right. The problem is perception. Clients don't like scandal, and Miss Johnson brings scandal wherever she goes. Logan slammed his palm against the table. No. The scandal is that you believed Meridian over her in the first place. The scandal is that you were more comfortable assuming a black woman lied than facing the truth. The room went silent. For the first time, the mask of corporate civility cracked, and the ugly truth hung naked in the air. That evening, Rosie sat at her kitchen table in her modest home in Pilsen. Noah colored in a workbook beside her, humming softly to himself. The boy's calm presence steadied her, but her own hands trembled around the mug of tea she hadn't touched. There was a knock at the door. Logan stood outside, exhaustion etched into his face. They want me to fire you, he admitted the moment she let him in. They say you're a liability, that clients are nervous, that the company's reputation is on the line. Rosie met his gaze, her voice steady. Of course they do, because it's easier to blame me than to admit the truth that racism and corruption walk hand in hand in their world. Logan's chest tightened. I told them no. I told them I'd rather be suspended than sacrifice you. Her eyes softened just slightly. Then you'll be suspended. Or worse, because men like them don't care about truth. They care about power. And people like me, black, poor, inconvenient, we're the first they feed to the wolves. Noah looked up from his coloring book, blinking at the silence. Mom, are we in trouble? Rosie reached over, smoothing his hair. No, baby. We're just telling the truth, and sometimes the truth scares people. Logan swallowed hard, watching her comfort her son with a grace and strength that put every executive he knew to shame. By the end of the week, Rosie was a household name. TV pundits argued over her legacy. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse with signs that read, "Believe Black women," while others sneered with placards calling her a fraud. Vindication had come at a cost. Rosie had won her battle in court, but outside those walls the war was far from over. And as Logan drove away from her house that night, he realized the truth with aching clarity. Clearing Rosie Johnson's name was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a larger fight, one against a world that would never forgive her for daring to rise above the role it had assigned her. The Monday after the trial, Griffin Imports held its largest staff meeting in years. Executives, translators, and junior associates packed the auditorium. The air buzzed with tension. At the front, Logan stood behind the podium. His voice rang steady. "Today we welcome our new Director of International Relations, Rosie Johnson." The room rippled with murmurs, some polite applause, some stony silence. A few arms crossed defiantly. Rosie walked onto the stage in a simple navy suit, no frills, no pretense. Her hair was braided neatly, her shoulders squared. She didn't smile. She didn't try to charm. She simply stood there, calm and unshaken, the way she had in every courtroom, every boardroom, every janitor's closet. She had survived. "Thank you, Mr. Griffin," she said, her voice carrying without a microphone. "And thank you to those of you willing to give me a chance. I know not everyone here welcomes me." "That's fine. I didn't come here to make friends. I came here to do the work." The room went quiet. Even her critics couldn't deny the authority in her tone. Her first test came 3 days later. A delegation from Japan arrived with a contract so complex that even Griffin's seasoned translators struggled. The clauses referenced obscure trade legislation amendments buried deep in international law. For 2 hours, confusion reigned. Then Rosie stepped in. "This line," she said, pointing, refers to the 1987 import statute. "It requires proof of traceability, not just certification." The Japanese representative nodded, relieved. "Yes, exactly. She understands." Logan watched the faces around the table shift confusion, giving way to grudging respect, then astonishment. In 20 minutes, Rosie untangled what others had failed to solve in hours. When the clients left, satisfied, James Morrison muttered under his breath to Richard Hayes, "How the hell did she know that?" "She studied international commercial law," Logan replied coldly. "Something you might have known if you'd read her resume instead of dismissing her as a janitor." But respect did not come easily. In the cafeteria, whispers lingered. "She's only here because Griffin's protecting her. She's the company's diversity trophy. Let's see how long she lasts." Rosie heard it all. She carried the words home like shards under her skin. At night, while Noah did his homework, she sat at the kitchen table reviewing contracts by lamplight, determined to leave no room for error. The next morning, she walked back into Griffin Imports with her head high. Weeks passed. Contracts that had stalled for months were signed under her guidance. Clients praised her precision, her cultural insight, her ability to see what others missed. Even the most skeptical board members were forced to acknowledge results they couldn't argue with. One afternoon, after closing a deal worth $500,000, an older executive approached her reluctantly. His voice was low, almost grudging. "You're good at this. Better than I expected." Rosie met his eyes. "Better than you expected because I'm a woman or because I'm black." The man shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean—" "You did?" Rosie interrupted gently. "And that's all right. But from now on, expect excellence, because that's what you're going to get." She turned and walked away, leaving him staring after her, cheeks burning with shame. By the end of her first month, Rosie had not only proven herself indispensable, she had forced the company to confront its own blind spots. Her success was undeniable, but so was the hostility that simmered beneath the surface. Every triumph seemed to sharpen the resentment of those who had dismissed her. And though Logan celebrated each victory, Rosie knew better. She knew the higher she climbed, the harder they would try to pull her back down. But for the first time in years, she wasn't hiding in shadows. She was standing in the light, unapologetic, unbreakable, and determined to rise above every wall built to keep her out. It started in small moments, a glance held too long in a crowded hallway, the way Logan's voice softened when he spoke her name, the flicker of something unspoken whenever their eyes met across a conference table. Rosie noticed it, of course. She always noticed. But every time that warmth threatened to grow, she built her walls higher. One evening after a long negotiation with European clients, Logan walked her to the elevator. The office was nearly empty, the city lights glowing beyond the glass. "You were incredible today," he said, his tone more personal than professional. Rosie pressed the elevator button without looking at him. "It's my job." He hesitated. "It's more than that." The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, turning to face him. "Mr. Griffin, don't confuse gratitude with something else. It never ends well." The doors slid shut before he could answer. But fate pushed them together again and again. On Friday night, Rosie's son Noah had a school recital. She slipped into the auditorium just as the children lined up on stage. Logan was already there, seated quietly in the back row. Rosie's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, sliding into the chair beside him. "I wanted to see him perform." Her heart tightened. Noah stood at the front, his small hands fidgeting with the microphone. His voice trembled at first, then grew stronger, filling the hall with hesitant but determined notes. When the applause erupted, Rosie's eyes shone with pride. Noah spotted Logan in the crowd and waved shyly. Later outside the school, the boy tugged at Rosie's sleeve. "Mom, can Mr. Griffin come to dinner?" "Please." Rosie stiffened. "Noah. Just once. He's nice." And he clapped the loudest. Logan crouched to Noah's level. "Only if your mom says yes." Rosie's walls trembled. Against her better judgment, she nodded. One dinner, nothing more. That night, over a simple meal of rice and stew, Rosie watched Logan laugh at Noah's jokes, help with math homework, and wash the dishes without being asked. It was the first time her home felt lighter, as though some invisible burden had been shared. But later, when Noah went to bed, Rosie confronted him. "You can't keep showing up like this," she said firmly. "My son is already attached. If you walk away, I'm not walking away." "You don't understand," she snapped. "Men always walk away, especially when they realize what it means to love a black woman with a black child. The world doesn't just look at us, it judges us. Cruelly." Her voice cracked, the years of scars bleeding through. "Do you know how many times I've been told I wasn't enough, that I was too dark, too poor, too complicated? Do you know how many men thought loving me would ruin their reputation?" Logan stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "Then they were fools, because loving you would be the best thing I ever did." For a moment, the air between them pulsed with possibility. But Rosie shook her head, retreating into the safety of distance. "No, you don't get to say that. Not when you don't know if you can stand in the fire with me. Because once you cross that line, it won't just be about us. It'll be about every stare, every headline, every whisper about why the powerful white CEO is with the black cleaning woman." Logan's chest tightened. "Then let them whisper." Rosie's eyes burned with equal parts longing and pain. "Easy for you to say. You've never had to live under the weight of being black in America. I carry it every day. And if you really want me, you'll have to carry it too." Silence stretched between them, heavy, electric. For the first time in his life, Logan Griffin understood this wasn't a love story against the odds. This was a love story in the crossfire, one that could either break them or burn away every wall the world had built between them. The invitation arrived in a crisp white envelope stamped with the seal of the International Human Rights Council. Rosie almost tore it in half, assuming it wasn't meant for her. But inside the words were clear. "Rosie Johnson is invited to deliver the keynote address at the Global Equality Summit, Washington, D.C. When Logan heard, he nearly smiled for the first time in weeks. "You have to go," he said. "This is your moment." Rosie hesitated. "My moment, or their spectacle. They don't want me, they want the symbol. The black cleaning woman who rose from the basement to the boardroom. A story they can applaud for 15 minutes before forgetting. Then remind them, you're more than a symbol," Logan urged. "Show them who you really are." The conference hall in Washington buzzed with power. Diplomats, CEOs, activists, journalists from every corner of the globe filled the rows. Giant screens displayed Rosie's name beside the summit's slogan, Voices of Change. When she stepped onto the stage, the applause was hesitant, almost curious. A woman in a simple dark suit, her hair braided back, no designer labels to soften her presence. She stood tall, scanning the room. Then she spoke. "I was not supposed to be here. Not in this room. Not at this podium." The crowd quieted. For years I was invisible. I scrubbed floors while executives signed contracts above me. I spoke 6 languages, but no one heard my voice. Because I was the wrong color, the wrong gender, in the wrong place. Her words cut through the silence, sharp as glass. I exposed corruption, and they called me incompetent. I demanded justice, and they called me angry. I wanted dignity, and they said I should be grateful to mop their floors. But I am here not because they allowed me, but because I refused to disappear. A ripple of applause spread, cautious at first, then growing. Rosie's gaze hardened. "Do not clap for me if you will not listen to the women who still clean your offices at night. Do not call me a hero if you ignore the voices of Black women who fight every day for the right to be seen, to be heard, to be respected." The room erupted into thunderous applause. Cameras flashed. Hashtags exploded online. Rosie speaks. Believe. Black women, voices of change. But the backlash was immediate too. The next morning, headlines split down the middle. Rosie Johnson, a new face of justice. Unqualified janitor, lectures the world on equality. On talk shows, pundits sneered. "She's exaggerating. Nobody discriminates like that anymore. She's playing the race card." Would she even be on that stage if not for Griffin's patronage? Rosie watched from her hotel room, Noah asleep in the next bed. She turned off the television, her chest tight. When Logan knocked on her door, she opened it with tired eyes. "You see, the higher I climb, the harder they pull me back down." He stepped inside, his voice low but fierce. "Let them pull. You keep climbing. You've already won more than they can stand." Rosie sank into the armchair, staring at the city lights through the window. "I don't want to be anyone's symbol, Logan. I just want to be me. A woman, a mother, a professional, not a headline, not a hashtag." He knelt beside her, his hand hovering near hers. "You're more than any of those things, and you don't need to prove it to anyone. Not to them, not even to me. Just live it." For a moment, the fire in her chest dimmed, replaced by something fragile but real. Out there, the world was debating her worth, her motives, her very existence. But in this quiet hotel room, Rosie allowed herself to believe, if only for a breath, that she was more than the world's judgment. She was simply Rosie Johnson. And for once, that was enough. Paris. The International Trade Conference glittered beneath chandeliers and velvet curtains, a theater of power where deals worth billions were sealed over champagne. Griffin Imports had a prime spot, and Rosie stood at Logan's side, not as a cleaner, not even as a translator, but as Director of International Relations. Her presence drew stares, some curious, others hostile. A few diplomats offered polite smiles, but more than once she caught the flicker of disdain in their eyes. What is she doing here? By the 3rd day, Rosie had already proven herself. She had mediated between German and Japanese clients, diffused a cultural misunderstanding with a Chinese delegation, and translated flawlessly in 4 languages. Still whispers followed her through the halls like shadows. She doesn't belong. She's just Griffin's experiment in diversity. Or maybe something else. The closing gala was held in a ballroom with gilded walls and an orchestra playing soft jazz. Executives and politicians danced under crystal chandeliers. Rosie wore a navy blue dress, elegant but modest, her hair pulled back. Logan watched her from across the room, his chest tightening. When the music shifted to a slower rhythm, he crossed the floor and offered his hand. "Director Johnson," he said with a smile, "may I have this dance?" She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. The crowd parted slightly as they moved together, her steps graceful, his steady. For a moment, the noise of the room faded. "Do you remember the first time we met, Logan?" asked softly. Rosie's lips curved faintly. "You mean when you mocked a black cleaning lady in front of your boardroom? Hard to forget." His smile faltered. "I've been trying to make up for that ever since." She studied him, eyes searching. "And what exactly are you trying to make up for, Mr. Griffin? The arrogance or the prejudice?" He swallowed. "Both. And maybe more than that." Then, without planning it, without caring who saw, Logan stopped moving. The music carried on, but he dropped to one knee in the middle of the ballroom. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked like gunfire. "Rosie Johnson," his voice carried through the hushed room, "you've changed me. You've shown me that love is more than power, more than wealth, more than reputation. You've taught me what dignity looks like. And I love you for your strength, your brilliance, your heart. Will you marry me?" The ballroom erupted into chaos. Some clapped. Others whispered furiously. A few stormed out in disgust. Rosie froze, her breath caught. Every eye was on her. The black woman who had mopped floors now being proposed to by a white billionaire CEO in the heart of Europe's elite. She pulled him gently to his feet, her voice low but clear. "Do you know what you've just done?" "Yes," he said firmly. "I've told the world the truth." "No," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "You've declared war. On your shareholders, on your board, on every prejudice that's been waiting to tear us apart." "Then let them come," Logan answered, his jaw set. "Because if this company can't accept you as my partner, then I'll build another one from the ground up." For the first time, Rosie's defenses cracked. A tear slipped down her cheek. She shook her head, half in disbelief, half in wonder. "You really are insane," she murmured. "Insanely in love with you," he said. The orchestra swelled, the cameras flashed, and in that gilded room filled with power and privilege, Rosie Johnson stood at the center of a storm, not as a victim, not as a token, but as a woman whose very existence defied the cycle meant to keep her down. And for the first time in her life, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the cycle could finally break. Chicago shimmered under a sky so clear it felt like a blessing. On the rooftop of Griffin Imports, the city stretched wide and endless skyscrapers glinting in the morning sun. But up here the air was different, lighter, charged with expectation. Rows of white and gold chairs curved toward an altar draped in flowers. Musicians tuned their instruments, the soft hum of strings drifting into the air. Guests filed in, colleagues, community leaders, neighbors from Pilsen who had once seen Rosie as just another woman hurrying to the bus stop with her son. Now they came dressed in their best, proud to witness history. In a quiet room below, Rosie stood before a mirror. Her gown was simple satin, elegant, without excess. Her hair was braided into a crown, her skin glowing in the morning light. Noah now ate, fussed with the small ring pillow in his hands. "You look beautiful, Mom," he whispered. Rosie bent to kiss his forehead. "And you look very handsome. Are you ready?" He nodded fiercely. "I practiced walking with the rings 15 times. She laughed softly, but her heart swelled. For years, she had walked hallways with her head bowed, carrying buckets and mops. Today she would walk toward a future she had once thought impossible. The music began. Guests rose. Rosie stepped into the sunlight, Noah walking proudly before her. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, not the whispers of doubt she had heard all her life, but sounds of awe. She met Logan's gaze across the aisle. He stood tall in a black tuxedo, eyes shining not with power, not with pride, but with love. Every step brought her closer, not just to him, but to the life she had carved out of defiance, grit, and resilience. When she reached the altar, Logan took her hands. His voice trembled, but he didn't falter. "Rosie Johnson, you came into my life like a quiet storm. You showed me that strength isn't money or status or titles. It's standing tall when the world tries to break you. I promise to love you, to honor you, to fight beside you. And I promise to love Noah as my own every day of my life." Tears blurred her vision, but she steadied her voice. "Logan Griffin, you taught me that not all powerful men abuse their power. You stood with me when it would have been easier to walk away. You saw me not as a cleaner, not as a token, but as a woman worthy of respect. I promise to love you, to challenge you, to stand with you. And I promise to never let this world define me by anything but my truth." Noah placed the rings carefully in their hands. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Logan pulled Rosie close and kissed her. The rooftop erupted in applause cheers, spilling out over the Chicago skyline. That night, long after the guests had gone and the music faded, Rosie and Logan stood together on the terrace. The city glittered below, alive and restless. "Do you remember," Rosie whispered, "how I used to mop this very floor? I would look up at the rooftop and wonder what the view must be like." Logan wrapped an arm around her. "You were always meant to stand here. I just had to be smart enough to see it." She leaned against him, her eyes wet but steady. "I never needed saving Logan. I just needed respect. And now, love." "You have both," he said, his voice quiet but fierce. "Forever." Rosie gazed out at the city, the same city that had once silenced her, doubted her, tried to erase her. Now she stood above it, not as a survivor, but as a woman who had claimed her own dawn. And as the wind carried the last notes of laughter into the night sky, Rosie Johnson knew her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every woman who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased. A new dawn had risen, not just for her, but for all who dared to fight to be seen.